Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Decryption and I hope you are well. In today's tutorial I'm going to show you how to set this cool hot dog stand up, just like Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, where you can pick your food and I can come in and say I want a hot dog. He speaks to us, the health goes up and the money goes down.
Finger lick. Oh yeah, copyright. Enjoy.
And then we can spend all our money on hot dogs. So let's get started. So the first thing you need is you will need a shop of some kind. You can either have a new level or anything like that. So for me, I'm going to do a hot cart because it's at a racetrack and we're just going to give him some funky things. So here's one I made earlier. So I have this hot dog here. He's just my typical NPC. He doesn't really do anything special and I've just got a static mesh of a hot cart. So I've tried to break this video down into segments that makes the most sense, hopefully, so we can easily find our way and we're not jumping everywhere. So where we're going to start first is we need to give the player some sort of health so we can actually increase it when you eat food. If you've already got a health system, you can skip to the time on screen now to jump to the cash system. So for the health system, I've tried to make it as flexible as possible without being game specific. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up into my blueprints folder and I'm going to create a new folder called component. Inside here I'm going to create a new blueprint class and a type of actor component, and I'm going to call it BAC for blueprint actor component _ damageable. And this is a component that you can place on any actor, and if they're damageable, as in they can take damage, they would theoretically have a health, whether that health is 1 for instant death or 100 for a big boss. I'm just going to delete the two events out and I'm going to add two variables in here. One of current health, and that'll be a type of integer. Then I'm going to duplicate this with Control D and I'm going to call it max health. Just going to compile and give these some default values. So for the max health I'm just going to set to 100, and for the current health, because I want to start with less health, I'm going to set to 50 so we can see it actually takes effect in game. I'm going to tick the two eyeballs so we can see it public. Next, when we receive a health update or we change our max health, we want to be able to tell everything that needs it we have changed our health. I'm going to create an event dispatcher here called on health change. If you don't know what an event dispatcher is, think of it just like a variable, but you can store code in it instead. So simply by dragging it out and doing a sign, you can see we can now add code to this event dispatcher just like we could data in a variable. So we could add loads of different calls to this on health change from the HUD, from objectives, and anytime this on health change is called, it will run all the code underneath it. And then all I'm going to do is tap on my event dispatcher and I'm going to give two inputs. The first one will be new health and it'll be a type of integer, and then the next one will be new max health, also type of integer. So anytime we call on health change, we will tell it what the new health and new max health is, so everything can already know. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a function in here called update health, and this is going to be what we call anywhere that needs it whenever we need to update the health. From the update health, I'm going to add an input of value, and this is going to be the value that we need to affect the health by, whether it's positive or negative. So I'm going to drag in the current health and I'm just going to do a set and connect it up, and then I'm also going to drag in the current health and then just plus these together from the current health. So if value is positive, it will increase the current health and then we set it. If value is negative, then it will decrease the current health and then we set it. Just before we set it, I'm just going to drag off from here and I'm going to do a clamp on the integer and I'm just going to set the max to our max health. All a clamp does is limit what something can be. So if our maximum is 100 and we try to set the value to 110, clamp will reduce it to 100 and then plug it into the set. So we now can't go over the health. If you want to be able to go over your maximum health, then don't add a clamp. And then the final thing we need to do is just call on health change, like so. And then we can pass in our new health and then our new max health. We can compile and save. Next, if you open up your player, so in my case it's the first person character, but if you've got a third person or a custom one, and then all I'm going to do is add in my damageable component, like so, and I can hit compile and save. Now we've done the health component, or you've skipped that step because you've already got one, we need to do some sort of cache system. And again, I'm going to do this as a component because different things might be able to store cache. It'd be a good way to have a generic place where we can update somebody's cache, remove the cache, and it can work on vending machines, registers, or people. So the exact same process, and if you do have a cache system already, feel free to skip this step, but I'm going to create a blueprint class of type active component, BAC, cache, and I'm going to open this up. I'm going to delete the two events in there, and I'm going to create a new variable of cache, and I'm just going to set it in. You can call this whatever you want, make sure you tick the eyeball, but I'm going to call mine cache. You can call it gold, money, anything. Then I'm going to add an event dispatcher of on cache change, and I'm going to add an input of new cache value and just set it to an int. And then I'm going to create a new function called cache change, and this will take in a value type of integer, and then all we're going to do is we're going to get the cache and I'm going to plus onto it. So if the value is positive, it will increase the cache. If the value is negative, it will decrease it. And then I don't need to limit how much cache you can have. Theoretically, you could add a clamp node here and just say the maximum amount of cache you're allowed to carry is 9999999, but it doesn't really matter. And then all you do from here is just set cache. So finally, just call your event on cache change, and I'm just going to call it, and I'm going to plug in the new cache value like so. Finally, jump to your character and then just cache component. I'm just going to name mine cache. Now on the player, if you click the cache, you can set its default value. So I'm going to say he has 20 fictional coins, and then the damageable, which I did earlier, you can see he's already got current health. Compile and save. Now that we've added the components to manage the player's health and their cache, I need to update my main HUD in order to display this on screen so we know when it's actually working. Again, if you've got a HUD already with this on, feel free to skip this step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my existing HUD. If you don't have an existing HUD, just come to your content drawer in your UI folder, right click user interface widget print and just call it HUD. Then on your player, add it into the viewport. So I've already got an existing one here. It's really basic. I've got a tutorial at the top and an interact here at the bottom. So what I'm going to do underneath the canvas panel is I'm going to add a progress bar, and you can add your health however you want. And I'm just going to call this PB health. I'm going to anchor it holding Control and Shift to the top left corner. Then I'm going to increase its size to something like 300 and reduce its height so it's just a small little bar. I'm going to give it a position X of -50 and a position Y of 50. Just move it down from the top. I'll do 25. There we go. And then I'm just going to set the percent to something like 0.4 just so we can see the color. It's currently blue. I don't want it blue. I know San Andreas uses red, but I'm going to go with a green, but I'm just going to make it a little bit lighter of a green. So, and there is my health. Make sure it's as a variable, and that's all we need to do for that. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a rich text, and I'm going to add this just like I did before, holding Control and Shift to the top left corner. I'm just going to give it a value of, I don't know, $50, and I'm going to click the set style, and I'm going to set it to my existing one. If you don't have a set style yet, it's a good thing to have. All you need to do is come into your content drawer, right click miscellaneous data table, and select rich text style row. Once you've done that, you can open it up and just add some basic styles. Default will be the one that's applied to everything. So you can see I have default, imp for important, and import to render my import. Link in the description for my other tutorials where I set this up. So I'm now just going to hit compile just to see it rendered, and you can see it's there nice and well. But I don't like that it's white, so I'm just going to wrap it in my imp tag because it's important, and you can see it's now better colored. I'm going to set the position to be the same, so -25. I'll set the width to be 300, so it's the same as the bar, and I'll set it to something like 50, so it's just below the health bar. So now I'm going to rename that to RTB cache. I'm going to make sure it's a variable, compile and save. I'm going to jump into my graph on the HUD, and I'm just going to add my event construct, which basically runs as soon as this HUD is loaded, and then I'm going to right click and I'm going to do get player horn. From here, I'm going to cast it to my first person character. Then from here, I can drag off and I can get their damageable component, and I can assign an event on health change like so. So when the health changes, we now need to update the progress bar. So I'm going to come and create a new function called update health, just to keep it tidy. And it's going to take two inputs. The first, new health, type of integer, and the second one will be new max health, like so. I'm going to right click and I'm going to add a map range clamp, and what this does is allow you to give it a value, such as our new health, and say what its current range is. So the range B will be our max health, like so, and then the output ranges, we want it between 0 and 1, because the progress bar is between 0 and 1. And this will do all the math logic you need in order to calculate it from 0 to 100 or 0 to a million to between 0 and 1 for you. And then from here, we can just drag in our progress bar, and I can just do set percent, and then I can connect in the new percent and then connect in to the exit. Finally, jump back to the event graph, and after this, I can just plug in the update health. And the final thing to do on this health change is I'm just going to copy the update health and I'm going to paste it after the bind, and then I'm just going to connect in players' current health and their max health. This will just mean as soon as you load the game, the HUD will up itself. So you'll see now if I try, the bar has jumped up to half full because that's where it needs to be. Perfect. Next, let's work on our hash amount. So I'm going to drag from the player again. I'll just do it up top, and I'll do cache, and it'll give me the cache component. And then just like we've done before, I'm going to drag from this, and I'm going to assign an event on cache change. I'm going to connect it up to the update health, just so it continues. Then we need a function in order to update the cache. So I'm going to add a new function called update cache, and this one's going to be just as simple, where we have an input of new cache value. Then I'm going to drag in my rich text box for my cache, and I'm going to set the text. Then what I am going going to do is I'm going to drag down from this text, I'm going to do a format. So what I want it to do is if you're in negative cache, I want it to be red. If you're in positive cache, then it can be orange. So what I'm going to do is open up my DT style that I discussed a moment ago, and I'm actually going to come and duplicate the important. My imp is currently orange, so I'm going to set this to bad, and I'm going to open up the text style and just grab the color, and I'm just going to roughly put it in the same position, but in the red, like so. There we go. So what this means we can do now is if we wrap something in angle brackets bad, it will be red, and if we wrap it in imp, then it will be good. So I'm going to get the new cache value, and I'm just going to say is less than. If it is, then I'm going to drag off and do select, and make sure you click the one that looks like a false. If it's true, then it means it's less than 0. So I'm going to make a literal string, and I'm just going to type the word bad, just like, and I'm going to copy it above it, and I'm going to connect it to the false. If it's false, then it means it's good, so I'm just going to set it, or you can call it whatever you want. Then in the format text here, I'm going to wrap curly brace, and I'm going to style, then I'm going to put my dollar, because I want it to be dollars, your coins, whatever you want, and I'm going to put curly brace again, and put cash, and close the curly brace. And finally, I'm just going to wrap it in a closing brace. One last thing is to wrap the style curly brace with angle brackets like so. So it will come in, and when we connect style to the return value and cache to the cache, it will replace the style with good or bad depending what value we're in, and then the cache amount. Finally, come back to the event graph and just call your update cache function so. Then one last thing is to just add the cache value at the top on the construct so it runs as soon as the game begins, and I'll just drag from the cache and do get cache, connect it, wrap it in a comment, and now you'll see once we start it, we've got $50, but I know we've got 20, so the screen should update to show $20. Perfect. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the basic HUD setup we need for this game. So now this is where the real tutorial begins. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a place where we can store our food. At each vendor, whether you've just got one or you've got 50 different ones, all the different food items will exist. I'm going to come back to my blueprints, and I'm going to go into the data folder, and I'm going to create a new folder in here called food. Inside here, I'm going to create a new blueprint class, and it'll be a type of primary data asset. And I'm going to call this PDA food. I'm going to open it. So a primary data asset is a type of class within Unreal where each data asset can store one item's detail, and that's what it's meant for. So your gun might be a data asset, your motorbike, your car, all the different versions with the speeds and the properties can be different data assets. It's not good for all of the occasions, but sometimes it does come really handy. So I'm going to add a variable here of food name, and I'm going to set it to a type of text, and this will be the name of the food, chicken skewers. I'm going to tick the eyeball, add another variable of HP value, and I'm going to set this to an integer. This is going to be how much HP it increases you by, and finally I'm going to add a cost. And if you want to add any other variables here, such as fat increase or water intake, anything else you need, this is the place to do it. I'm going to compile and save and just close it out because we don't need it now. Then back in the content drawer where we've got PDA food, I'm going to right click and I'm going to go miscellaneous data asset, and it'll ask you what class do you want to use. So I'm just going to type my PDA and my food, and I'm going to call it DA underscore, and this is where you can name it after the food you want. So I'm going to call mine hot dog, and I'm going to open it. So you can see we can add all the properties we need. So I'm going to say it's a hot dog is the name. The HP value will be 5. It's not very nutritious out of 100, and the cost be, I don't know how much these things cost, $5 for a hot dog. That sound too low? That'll be fine. And then just go ahead and you can either duplicate it or just keep creating all the different foods that you need. And as you can see, here's some I made earlier. So I've got all sorts of different foods here, and if you open them up, they've all got values and costs. You can also add icons and anything else you want in here, eating sounds, but I'm going to stick to the basic. And now that you've got all your food, you can also categorize these however you want. They can go anywhere you want as well. I'm gonna create a new subfolder in here. I'm just going to call it food products. I'm going to add all these food products inside. I'm going to keep the base class out of it, and then I'm going to come in, and now we can create our actual storage for each store. So now we can create the actual storage for the store. So what's the store's name? Does it have a logo? And then what food does it serve? So I'm going to right click inside this food subfolder. I'm going to create a new blueprint structure, and I'm going to call it s underscore food store. And the first variable, I'm going to set it to store name, and this will just be a type text like so. Then I'm going to add another variable, and this will be food. And this time I can set this to the type of my PDA food asset, and I'm just going to right click it, and I'm just going to set it to be a type of array like so. And then the only other things I'm going to add here is I'm going to add start audio, which will be when you walk up and it'll say, hello, how can I serve you today, or something like that. I'm going to set it to a single type, and I'm going to search for a sound cue. But I'm not going to use an object reference like it will default add. I'm going to add a soft object reference, and this means it won't load all the audio in memory until we actively tell it to, saving some memory. And then I'm going to add another one just below also this called purchase audio, and this is going to be when you click something and it goes, hope you enjoy. And then I'm going to add an exit audio, which will be goodbye, and they'll all be sound object references like so. Now that we have our struct set up, we can now create a data table that will manage the store. I'm going to create a new folder called stores, and inside here I'm going to right click miscellaneous data table, and I'm going to pick my new S food store, and I'm going to call it DT food stores. I'm going to open this up. So in here is where you add all the different rows for every store you want. So I'm going to add a new one here. I'm going to set the row name to be the name of my store, so Glenn's hot dog stand, and I'm going to, in the store name, this is where I can format it nicely like so. The food, this is where I can start dragging in my data assets. So I'm going to come back to the food products and I'm going to sell. He's definitely going to sell a hot dog, and you can add as many or as little as you want. He also is doing skewers, because you can probably make that, and for some reason he's doing exotic mango smoothies. Now for the start audio, you can basically add any audio you want. It doesn't even have to be vocal. So what I've done is I've gone into my sounds folder, and in my voices, shots, and into Glenn's hot dog stand, and then inside Glenn's hot dog stand you will see I have my start, my purchase, and my exit audio. All I have done is got some audio lines that would work for each aspect. So for my start,
yes?
I've got him just shocked, somebody's come up, and what I've done is created a sound cue from all of them. So if you just right click on your first audio, hold shift and click on all the others you want, right click and choose create sound cue, it will automatically set your sound cue up with a random note in them all in. So every time you play it,
hi, what do you want?
You can see the red lines are jumping between them completely random.
Yes?
And that's how we can achieve it, just using a single sound cue. So all I did was I came into 11 Labs, I typed something I'd want him to say, and then I just clicked generate. And after downloading it, converting it to a WAV file in Audacity or Audacium, whatever you want, then I imported it into Unreal. Just make sure you trim off the start and the end. Mine came with like a second silence for some reason. It just threw the illusion a little bit. So all I'm going to do now is drag in my start audio, purchase audio, and my exit audio. And you'll notice it will bind just like normal, even though we set it. Means we have to load it ever so slightly differently. So now that we have our stores set up, and you can add as many of these as you want, we next need to create a new input source. And you begin the map. You don't want the ability to move anymore. You don't want to be able to interact, change your inventory, any of that. We want all that to be disabled. So you could go through and manually wrap all of those events in if is busy, if in the shop or something. That's going to take a bunch of code changing. So looking at the new enhanced input system, I think I've found a better way to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into my blueprints import here. And if you're using the enhanced input system, you can follow this section. If you're using the old input system from UE4, I'm not sure what you could do there, but you might just have to wrap everything in the if state. So I'm going to duplicate this input map context here, and I'm just going to call it IMC for input mapping context, player shop, and I'm going to open it up. So you can see it's got all my existing interacts here, but I'm just going to delete them all off, and instead I'm going to come into the actions, and I'm going to create some specific input actions for being in a shop. So when the menu's open, there's really only 3 you need. I'm going to duplicate the shoot, and I'm just going to call it IA shop underscore purchase, so when you press enter or confirm, and then I'm going to duplicate this again. You have the exit, and the only other unique one we need, if you duplicate this across, is move. And this is where you press up and down on the D-pad or the keypad, where you want to change your select options. So I'm going to open this move up, and I'm just going to change it from a value type of digital to axis 1D float. The difference is the Boolean, the digital version, will say press, whereas this one axis float will tell us it's pressed at what value. If it's 0, it's not pressed. If it's -1 or 1, it's up or down. Perfect. And now that we've added these, we can go to our mapping here, and I can add all the different mappings. So if I type shop underscore and I'll do purchase, we can say to purchase it, I want to press shift, and on the controller I will say you press the bottom facing button, so X or A. The mouse will just work around this. Next I'm going to add another one for my shop exit, and I will say on the PC this is enter, because that's what San Andreas does, and then for the controller I will say it's the top button, which will be triangle or whatever Xbox this is. And then finally the last one will be the move, so I'll add a shop move, and I'll say for this I want the up arrow key, or I'll press the down arrow key, or because we're good to our get users, I'm going to add a W and an S in as well, and then I'm going to add 2 more, one for the D-pad up and then the final one for the D-pad down. There we go. So what this means is later we can switch between these 2 mapping contexts, and then when we do, it will outright disable all controls on the player because they're not physically set up to be able to use it. And now with that, ladies and gentlemen, I believe we've got to the stage where we can start working on the actual food food menu system. We've done all the prerequisite we need in order to set it up. So we've got a HUD with our cache and our health, we've got our food, and we've got our stores, and we've got our input. So let's begin. So the way I'm going to action mine is I'm going to place a trigger in front of wherever the store is. Theoretically, you could place it in the middle of nowhere and it would still action. I'm going to open up my content drawer and I'm going to go to my blueprints, and I'm going to create a new blueprint here of type of actor, and I'm going to call it BP food store, and I'm going to open it up. I'm going to add a box collision, which will be my trigger, so I'm going to name it trigger, and this will be how we start the actual food store. I'm going to just move it up so it's on the ground, and then all we can do is just come in and drag it in front of the store like so. Place it where you want it to action, about there. So if you walk up in there, it will begin it. You could add a fancy effect, a fancy round thing, anything you want. For now, I'm just going to untick hidden in game on the trigger, so when we're actually in the game, you will see it will still be visible just so we know it's there. So now I'm going to click my trigger and I'm going to add a on overlap begin. I'm going to delete all the things above, and I'm just going to straight from the other actor, I'm going to cast to my character, whether this is your first person, third person, anything like that. Now we're going to use this character and its controller a lot throughout this menu to actually activate things. So I'm going to drag off and I'm going to instantly promote this to a variable like so. I'm just going to call this player character, and I'm going to do the same for the player controller. So I'm going to right click and I'm going to do get player controller, and I'm going to promote this to a variable because we'll use this for adjusting the camera and other aspects, and it just means we don't have to repeat it over and over and over. So I'm going to wrap that in a comment of cache player just so we'll do it later. So the first thing we do is when we're ready to begin this story is we need to disable player. We need to stop them moving, stop looking, and we need to switch their inputs over. So I'm going to come in and create a new function called disable player. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag player character in. I'm going to drag off and do set movement mode, and you'll see it'll go to the character movement, and I'm going to set it to none. This means that the character can't move anymore. Then I'm going to drag off from the same character movement, and I'm going to call stop movement immediate. So if your character is running and they run past it, they will carry on unless you call stop movement. So this will freeze them where they are and set the movement mode to none so they can't continue moving. And I'm going to wrap this in a disable movement comment. Next, I'm going to drag in the player controller. I'm going to set show mouse cursor, and I'm going to tick it because we want the mouse cursor to be active, otherwise we're not going to be able to click on things. If you're doing a controller only based game, then you don't need to show the cursor. And then finally, we just need to disable the player's input. So I'm going to drag from the player controller in, and I'm going to get enhance input local player subsystem. Mouthful right there. From here, I'm going to do a remove mapping context, and this is where we remove the player's default context. If you've got multiple contexts, it might be worth removing them all just so you don't run into any issues. So for the player's default, I'm going to remove it. On the same enhanced input system, I'm going to come across and do a add mapping context, and you guessed it, we're going to add in the player shot like so. I'm going to switch the player input around like so, and now we can compile and save. So now we have a way to disable the player. So back in the event graph, as soon as we've cached everything, I'm just going to come in and disable player like so. But one thing we can do while we are here is I can right click the disable player and duplicate it and call it enable player, and we can basically just flip everything back around to enable player. So instead of disable movement, we can enable movement. The movement mode will be walking. We no longer need to stop the movement, so we can drag off and just connect it back up. Now in my game, I don't want the cursor showing all the time, so I can untick that, but if you want the cursor visible because you're doing a top down game or something, feel free to just keep it to remove it. Then this time from the remove mapping context, I'm going to drag the store in, and from the adding, I'm going to put the player default back in. And there we go. With that little change, we've got a new way to enable the player, which will save us some time later. Now we've frozen the player in place, we need to actually go and get the details of the store so we know what to set. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag off from this disable player. I'm going to do a get data table row like so. For the data table, I'm just going to plug in our stores, and for the row name, I'm going to promote it to a variable like so. And this can be stores row name. And I'm going to make sure I have the eyeball on this so we can edit in the details view. So if the row's not found, I'm just going to print out a string saying error store name not found. So that's just a dev friendly comment if we've not set the store up. From the out row, I can drag off and I can now do break. And you can see we've got access to all the different variables that is inside our store. So the first thing I want to do is I want to play the store audio to say, hello, I'm here, kind of thing. So I'm going to come up and on these components, I'm going to add an audio here. And we don't need to change anything on it. And I'm going to come down into my event graph here. And I'm just going to add a new custom event called play audio async. Then it's going to take an input. The input name will be audio and the data type will be sound cue, but make sure you hover over it and choose the soft object reference. Next, I'm going to add another input called wait, and this will be a type of input. So I'm going to use this audio event in two different ways. The first way will be you pass it a weight of 1 and it will always play the audio unless something else is playing. However, when you purchase food, I don't want him to say something every single time. I want it to be a bit random. So I'm going to pass the weight in of something like 0.6 or 0.8. So it won't won't always play the audio. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag down my audio component here, and I'm going to check if audio is playing. Because if it's playing, we don't want to stop it and then play something else, because that always sounds weird. From here, I'm going to drag off and do not boolean. So if it's not playing, I'm going to connect this to an and here. And then from the and, we want to right click and do get random bool with a weight and connect the weight into it. So if it's 1, it will always be true every single time. If it's 0.5, it will be true 50% of the time. And I'm going to connect that to the and here. And then only if these two criteria are met, that it's not currently playing audio and it's generated a random bool, then we can begin loading the audio. So I'm going to drag off from the sound here, and I'm going to type load, and you'll see you have 2 options. Load asset blocking, which will block the code from progressing until it's loaded. We don't want to do that, even though it's going to be quite quick, because otherwise you're going to be freezing your code and running into hitches. So instead, I'm going to choose the async load asset, and I'm going to connect it to true. And what this is going to do is, while it's loading the asset, it will allow you to continue and run other code. In our case, it will run off and start moving the camera and doing everything it needs. On completed, we can then play the audio. So from the object, I'm going to cast this to my sound cue, like so. And I know this is going to be a sound cue, and I'm going to connect that to the completed. Make sure it's connected to the completed, otherwise you're going to get errors. You don't want it on the top one. And then if it's finally generated it, I can drag my audio component in, and I can do set sound, and I can connect in my sound cue. And then from the same audio, just paste it afterwards and just do play. And I can wrap all this in a nice little comment, play audio async with a weight. And now that we've done that, we've got a really easy way after this row found back in your override, and I'm going to call play audio async, and then all we need to do is pass it a weight. So I always want him to say something when you first go to him, and I can connect the start audio up just like so. So you now see, if we compile and save and come back to the trigger here, store's row name is Glenn's hot dog stand. That's correct. So I can begin by, and you'll see if I run up to it,
Hi, what do you want?
it'll speak to us. We can't do anything because we've not proceeded with the UI yet. So one thing you'll notice is if I see the trigger here, but I look backwards and walk into it, we'll freeze looking the completely wrong way. We need it to turn around and face the chat, which is really easy to do. So what we're going to do is come back to our trigger here, and just under our play audio async, I'm going to create a new event called start camera. And unfortunately, because we're using alert in order to smoothly rotate the camera, you're going to have to do it as an event, not a function, but it shouldn't matter. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to drag in my player controller. So this is where it gets a bit